Hi, I'm Nick Thomas and welcome back to the Academy of Historical Fencing. So, small sword fencing is really fun. You should be doing more of it, and it's also at times a pain in the arse to get into for the simple reason that training weapons are not always readily available and can be expensive. Particularly if, like at the AHF, you use a range of different weapons and you therefore have spent a lot of money on sabres or longswords or whatever, and you want to do this as an extra and don't want to fork out hundreds and hundreds for your training sword, and therefore enter Historical Fencing Armory. So that's exactly the situation at the AHF, is that we've done sabre and rapier and longsword and all these things for many years, but we've only ever toyed with small swords. So very few of us have had small swords and played with them. But there's never been a readily available option that I've been particularly happy with to recommend as a budget one for our students. And enter Historical Fencing Armory. So they were making eco rapiers and eco small swords, and by eco I mean budget, but that's their terminology. They've been making them for a few years, long since before we had them. But we got the first ones almost 2 years ago now, and that were the eco rapiers using épée blades. So épée blade is the one of the standard sport fencing weapons of today, and that is the hollowed out triangular section blade that they use in sport fencing, and it's a good blade for small sword at the lighter end of the scale. There's a whole range of small swords out there, but a couple of things that we didn't like on the specification, and we gave some advice as to how we think they could change it on the hilt, and they did, and they created a new model, and it's named after us, which is why it's called the Smallsword AHF. Primarily that the finger rings or anlets were way too large. They were more like a rapier. Whereas these are now scaled down to accurately represent antiques that I personally own, and loads of others that I've handled. So these rings here are called the anlets, and the block in the middle that covers the blade here will be called the core or the body, and that was just way too long to the level that people always put their fingers through, like a rapier, like this, which is not how we grip a small sword. Those rings aren't actually designed for putting the finger through when they're this small for this kind of small sword. You just rest with a pinch grip. Anyway, so we recommended those changes, reduced the size of the core and the anlets, half-weight pommel, which made it more accurate in terms of its handling, as in more accurately represent the historical swords, because you don't want them to be too hilt heavy really. You just lose all the blade presence and end up with something a bit too floppy, and the end result is a industrial looking, economic and cheap and readily available small sword. It's not the prettiest small sword in the world by any means, but it's €80, and for us, after shipping and PayPal fees, that means they work out around about £80, and that is actually with the musketeer blade. So they're cheaper if you want them with an épée blade. They come out something around about 60, but yeah, the musketeer blade. So the musketeer blade is the same style construction as an épée, so it's a hollowed out triangular section blade, but it's just heavier duty, and that means that it represents some of the heavier duty small swords that were used historically a bit better. So there was a whole range. Historically speaking, small swords are roughly 350 grams up to about 550, and if you use the musketeer blade, you end up with something in the late 400s or early 500s, depending on your guard choice. And therefore, we end up with something with this musketeer blade and the changes to the hilt that feels and acts like an original small sword, or like some original small swords. So for example, this lenticular blade example is actually a bit heavier than my training sword here, and this Kalishimard is a tiny bit lighter, although it's a bit shorter, and the balance is the same. So this now, the Smallsword AHF model, as it appears on the website, is actually this one with the aluminium guard. Does actually represent some original swords really nicely, but more recently they have said that some people have found these aluminium guards have been bending due to the stiffer blades of the musketeer blades now used. I can understand that. We haven't found it yet ourselves, but I think that's just chances that we haven't had a direct hit that's, buckled the guard. That said, it's a cheap foil guard, so you can bend it out or you can replace it either way. But as a result of that, they have now offered it with a steel guard, and the steel guard is a tiny bit bigger. So this is already a little bit larger than the antiques anyway, and then this is a little bit larger again, but I don't think it's a huge issue, and it does offer a little bit of extra hand protection without wildly going too far out of the realms of historical accuracy. And yeah, so what do we think of them? Well, if you use musketeer blades, you're going to find that they are stiff. They're like, you've got to treat them more like a rapier. So with say foil and épée, people have a tendency to really go for maximum penetration at times and have huge flex on their blades. And if you do that, that's going to hurt your opponents a bit more than it would with an épée. So if you treat this as you would, the other weapons that we tend to use in the club, like rapiers and sabers and stuff like that, you'll be absolutely fine. And the extra rigidity and the extra weight does give you great blade presence, great binding, great parries, and is much better suited to going up against heavier blades like rapiers and sabers and broadswords and that kind of thing, which ultimately we don't always want to be doing matched weapon stuff, so that's really ideal for us. And with this new steel guard, that's obviously strengthened the hilt up as well, also really well suited to fighting cutting weapons. And therefore, what they've ended up with is a very cheap, very easily and readily available training sword that accurately represents certain small swords. As I said, the slightly heavier examples. There are heavier again, depending on how your terminology works, because you can get up to rapiers. They represent some of the heavier duty blade examples, and if you like musketeer blades for a small sword and you're used to using slightly stiffer blades, you're really going to like them. But if you are the kind of person or club, because ultimately ask whoever runs your club about this, because some clubs use épée blades, some use musketeer, and some like us will use both. If you would like that, then you can still specify it with an épée blade. So their épée blades are really cheap. Their musketeer blades are €45 and their épées are about 15. Now, obviously don't expect therefore a very long-lasting Leon Paul style blade. I've broken the odd one of these, but they have generally proven pretty good. If you specify this, then you're going to end up with a much lighter, more agile and more flexible blade. So it depends what you want out of your small sword. And you can also decide, of course, on the guard. So here we've got two steel guard options. This is the épée and this is the musketeer. And we can have either option on either blade. So there's a musketeer blade with a aluminium guard. So the steel guard adds a chunk of weight, not insane amounts by any means, but it adds a bit, and that means it's especially well suited to going onto the musketeer blade, because of course it does balance off that weight a little bit. So I suspect, that's this one, I suspect that this is going to be the most popular in our club, so the musketeer blade and the steel guard. So it gives a nice robust small sword that still has very nimble handling and will be best suited to opposing heavier blades. And therefore, yeah, you've got 4 setups here. The good news is that every single one of them, however you set them up, is historically accurate. I have owned or do own and have handled plenty of examples that exactly match these for weight and handling characteristics, and the hilts are about the right size. So you are getting something that is, very accurate to a range of historical small swords if you go with this model. And we found them generally pretty good. In terms of durability, as I said, the épée blades won't last as long as a higher end blade. That's kind of understandable. Musketeer blades we've found very durable so far, really quite nice. And the guards, yeah, we haven't seen any issues, but okay, some people did find dents in the aluminium ones, but if you are concerned about that, opt for the steel guard. Now, what else is there to say about them? Well, I don't think there's really an awful lot. Is that if you want to get a prettier small sword, you can go to another company and spend more, and you're welcome to do that. But I know a lot of people, haven't got tons of money to spend, or want to do small sword as a nice extra on the side of their current HEMA or historical fencing practices. And personally, I think for those kinds of people, this is the best thing on the market that you can get, because you're getting a strong, reliable product that handles correctly and is really cheap and dependable. And if you've got to replace parts, it's not exactly the end of the world, although the hilt is nice and strong, so realistically it's going to come down to blades. And small swords, ultimately, they do break from time to time and you will have to replace blades, and it's readily available from this company. And so they took my advice on the hilt. It's now a good match to originals, except, as I said, for the guard. The guard is a little bit larger than the originals, which you'll have to decide on that, but I don't think, especially for a budget small sword, that that's necessarily a problem. And we found them really reliable and fun. So yeah, I absolutely recommend them. And I also have no financial connection to this company. I gave them some advice on specification and they named it after us, but no, we still buy them like everyone else. But yeah, if you want a small sword trainer, I do highly recommend them. Just be sure to ask your instructor or whoever's teaching you running your club, ask them which one to get, because some prefer épées and some prefer musketeers. And lastly, if you are interested in small swords, and you should be, because small swords are fun as hell, then come and join us at the Facebook group Smallsworders, which is quite a new group, and we are doing our best to spread the word of smallsword throughout the universe. Because yeah, smallsword, not only is it super fun and they're nice and light and agile, and you don't get whacked really hard with them, also pretty much every master of saber and broadsword, historically speaking, recommended that you practice smallsword. Why is that? Well, because it will make you awesome. Not necessarily just that, but smallsword practice or foil practice, so just thrust only practice with light blades, is really excellent at developing good form. It's of course good at developing your thrust work and your grappling techniques as well. So if you want to be even better than you currently are with saber and broadsword and backsword, do some smallsword. It will help and you'll really enjoy it. So yeah, come and join us on the Facebook group as well. And yeah, get some small swords and get smallswording. Thanks for watching.